We're delighted to be here today with you all, celebrating 50 years of connections that we've helped to foster across New Jersey. The New Jersey Council for the Humanities is a 501c3 nonprofit and the statewide partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And we work across New Jersey to support and promote community-based collective exploration of our histories, values, cultures, and beliefs. For those of you who aren't familiar with NJCH, I encourage you to check out njhumanities.org and to have a look at the programming that we'll be doing all year long to celebrate the public humanities in the Garden State. But right now, I want to turn this Zoom screen over to my colleague, Gigi Naglak, NJCH's Director of Programs, to introduce today's event, People at the Heart of the Humanities. Gigi?
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm going to start by mentioning a couple of logistical details, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers and we'll get started. If you wish to ask a question or make a comment during the program, please use Zoom's chat feature to do so. Karen and I will be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the program. To prevent background noise, we ask that you keep your microphones muted unless we ask you to unmute yourself and you're asking a question as part of our conversation. We encourage you to do that, to ask questions and make comments throughout in the chat. And we'll give people the opportunity to unmute yourselves for more discussion as well, if you wish to do so. I will periodically pause throughout our conversation to solicit questions and comments. So you don't need to wait for that, but we may ask you to wait for just a moment if we're coming up so that we can finish our existing thought and move on to the next question. Karen mentioned that this year is our 50th anniversary of the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, and anniversaries are really exciting moments for institutions because they give us a moment to pause and take stock, to consider where we have been, where we are at this moment, and of course, where we are going. And we're joined in that consideration today by three women who have been so central to the story of New Jersey for quite some time. Linda Caldwell Epps, Jocelyn White, and Patricia Atkins have spent decades helping their communities learn about their histories, advocate for themselves, and become part of the intellectual life of New Jersey. They have helped to elevate the experiences of others to tell a more complete and compelling story of our diverse state. I have had the pleasure of working with all three of them together on NJCH's newest program offering, Community History, where we very deeply consider the intersection between individual and collective experience and look quite closely at those whose stories are included when we tell the history of a particular place and time. But Linda, Jocelyn, and Pat's influence on the humanities in New Jersey and their interactions with each other go back quite a bit further than last summer when we were working together in community history. I can tell you that for sure. We'll get to all of that soon, but for now, let me introduce our panelists for today and tell you a little bit more about them. So Dr. Linda J. Caldwell Epps has more than 45 years of experience working in educational and cultural institutions, including the New Jersey Historical Society, NJN Television and Radio, and Bloomfield College. She founded 1804 Consultants in 2011 to bring her considerable experience and expertise to many cultural institutions throughout the state. And then in 2017, she co-founded the Sankofa Collaborative, which helps educators, community organizations, museums, and libraries present, interpret, and discuss African-American history and culture. I haven't done an exact count, I admit, but she may hold the record for the number of times a single person has served as a scholar on one of New Jersey Council for the Humanities grant-funded projects. I think it's very, very likely. She's near the top, if not at the top, for sure. I think that speaks to Linda's long experience and expertise in the humanities in New Jersey. Jocelyn White was the granddaughter of one of the first African-American educators hired in the Elizabeth Public Schools. So it is perhaps no surprise that she found her calling in education as well. A proud, lifelong Trentonian, Jocelyn taught for 40 years in Trenton's public schools, where she became a fierce advocate for public education. Since her retirement in 2015, she has continued her active community work and also opened the Big Easy restaurant with her brother in Trenton. Patricia Atkins has been a practicing attorney in New Jersey for more than 40 years. Her practice has been far-reaching in both public and private sectors, and with focuses in labor, employment, and education. In addition to her law practice, Pat has such a long list of volunteer and community activities that I can't even name them all here. But they include serving as a mentor to students and teachers, including law students, member of New Jersey's Amistad Commission. She's active in her church community and has served on numerous boards of directors, including presently with the William Trent House in Trenton, which is how our paths crossed for the first time, Pat. This barely scratches the surface of the varied and critical work that these three women have engaged in throughout their lives, but I don't want to delay our conversation any further with biographical details. We'll come to a lot of those throughout our conversation. Linda,
Gigi,
Pat, Jocelyn, welcome. Yes, Pat, go ahead.
I just have to say this, that in recognition of Linda's work in New Jersey, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from Princeton University.
That is true.
Was that year before last, Linda?
Last year. Thank you.
Okay.
That is an excellent point, and thank you for mentioning that, since I did leave it off. That is no small feat.
I agree.
No small feat at all. Well, it is so great to have all three of you here today to talk about your experience in the humanities. And we're talking today, our program is called The People, right? The people behind the humanities. The humanities as a discipline explores our human experience, which really puts people at the center of the experience. And when we talk about people, we're so often talking about communities. It's a thing that I've said like 5 times already today, at least, is the word community. So I'm wondering, maybe to get us started, if each of you could briefly think about and tell us, when you define, how do you define community for yourself and for the work that you do?
Well, for me, community at one point was the neighborhood in which I lived here in Trenton. I spent a great deal of my formative years in North Carolina, and in both instances, but particularly in Raleigh, North Carolina, the community really was the people on my street and the intersecting streets and the church. And here in Trenton, I think it was the people on my block. I grew up right in a blue collar community here in Trenton. And interestingly enough, when my family purchased our home, there were significantly more people of, more people who were white. And the neighborhood ultimately became almost all Black. For the most part, the parents were blue collar workers. However, there were 2 doctors that lived on the street. And in an unusual way, I think that there was just something in the air, because in every Black family on my block, at least one person, and in many instances, all of the children in the family went to college.
Excellent.
Wow. Well, for me, it's when I started working at the New Jersey Historical Society in 2004, or maybe even before that, when I worked with New Jersey Network Television and Radio, my community greatly expanded to include all of New Jersey because my job necessitated that. But perhaps, and it's remained the state of New Jersey because of the work that I do now. And trying to figure out what makes New Jersey, which I think is, New Jersey is pretty unique. I've had to consider the history and the culture of all people who live here in order to articulate that uniqueness to my clients and to for my job, how each section of the state relates, where they come from, their economic status, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, community for the past, I guess, at least 30 years, 25, 30 years has been the state of New Jersey. More specifically, my city of Newark, which is sort of a microcosm of New Jersey, believe it or not.
Well, community, just thinking about it, I always like to break it down and think about unity within the community. So my community encompassed my nuclear family, my mother, and we resided with my grandparents, but we were in North Trenton, which was a mixed community. A lot of Polish people resided in that area. And as Pat said, in her neighborhood, eventually it transitioned to be African Americans. But that was my first community. Then it expanded to my church, also my school community in high school. It was just like a small cadre of us, and we all knew that we were college bound. Well, I guess like Pat, you knew you were going to go to college. Linda, you knew that. I also knew that was the destiny. I didn't have a choice in the matter. Currently, my community would be a lot of the patrons. They're like an extended family at my restaurant, still very active in my church. And even though I'm retired, I'm still active in the union on a county and statewide level. So it has expanded. And I'm just grateful that I have such a community like that, because it sustained me, and it also encouraged me to and inspired me to keep on. Because sometimes you get a little discouraged, you can't see any progress, but they keep you going. They give you the reason to live and to keep striving.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring in Martin Luther King Jr.'s take on community, that basically said we're all interrelated, whether we want to face up to it or not. And whatever impacts one impacts the other. And I think that, and here I go, maybe getting into trouble, but I think that the trouble we're in as a country these days is because we don't think of community on a broader level, and we don't realize how interrelated we are as human beings, and we don't understand how our individual actions or our regional actions have an impact on other communities. And I think that's the sadness of this country, which is supposed to be a democracy and does take into consideration everyone, and that we have not learned that lesson yet is, I think, a sad commentary on our country.
I'd just like to add something else, and that is when I went to college, there were a very, very small number of African American students, and we all, without ever making any oral commitment to each other, but we became our community because we formed a cohort who were determined to deal with all of the negative things that we encountered, and we really, really supported each other. Two of us got married and had babies while we were still undergraduates. And without anybody saying anything, everybody was very supportive. I was blessed to have an aunt who babysat for me. And I still graduated in 8 semesters, but I had to take 1 semester off. My very dear friend who happened to be blessed to have her baby over semester break never missed a class. And she didn't have a babysitter. She just brought this infant to school with her every day, and she'd find one of the African American students. There was always somebody in the student union. She'd just bring the baby in, plop her down in somebody's lap and go to class. And if that person had to go to class before she came back, you just pass the baby to the next person. And I don't think we thought about it in any kind of formalized way. We just knew that we were there for ourselves and just as much for each other.
I've heard Pat tell that story before, and I'm always happy to hear it told again, partly because it reminds me of the neighborhood that I grew up in Elizabeth, that was a poor working / welfare community that was extremely diverse. My parents were the second or the third family to move in on a block that was all white, but multi-ethnic. It was Jewish, it was Catholic, it was Italian, it was Polish. And especially in my early years of growing up there, everyone helped each other. I remember one bitter cold Christmas when the temperature was 0, our pipes froze and something happened to the gas line in the Polish family next door. And our families ran back, and the kids ran back and forth carrying things from one house to another, trying to cook Christmas dinner. We didn't have the water, but they didn't have the stove. And that's an example of how community works on a very small level. But Pat also mentions another example. But again, if we are going to ever succeed the way we should, we have to understand that interreliance and that interrelatedness in everything that we do, which is, I'm just going to say one more thing and I'll shut up. But this to me is why the humanities appeals to me so much, because it takes into consideration a broader area of study or a broader area of disciplines. Understanding how a city is constructed, we may think that it's an engineer that does this, or it's an archaeologist that does it. I don't know. But it's really people who have a humanities sensibility, who understand the construction of how society is supposed to work. And I think that humanities get short shrift. In actuality, we're the people who manage to, or who prod others to get things done, because we have a more holistic approach of how the world is supposed to function.
I think you make such a good point, Linda. Sorry, Jocelyn, please continue.
No, I just think about the phrase 6 degrees of separation. And I think it's not even 6 degrees. I've been fortunate to travel globally, internationally, and I think about the global community. I have friends in Zimbabwe. I have friends in Barbados. I mean, South Africa, Morocco, just different places. And just, it's so exciting to have that interchange and exchange. You know, you find out about their community and embrace them, they embrace you. And I think that's so important. It's imperative that we listen to each other, that we respect one another. And like Linda emphasized, the problems in our society today, in this nation, deal with the fact that nobody wants to take the time to listen to another person. You know, it's just me, and forget about anybody else. It's a very sad commentary. And I think about Dickens when he said the best of times and the worst of times. I think it's accurate, it's apropos, because we are witnessing some really exciting things going on. We also are witnessing some disparaging, despicable things. So hopefully we could focus on the best, you know, and what did I say? Accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. So we're going to go on with that spirit.
Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned, all of you are talking about this balance between the individual and the societal, right? And I think this is something that the humanities does, right? And it's so interesting because so often when we're looking at something very, very small, an individual's experience, we are doing so in hopes of being able to use that experience to tell a broader story, or perhaps even the reverse of that, right? This broader story has bearing on these individuals as well. There's that interplay between this very, very small, the individual experience, and this broader social experience, this broader political experience, this broader historical experience, right? And I think the humanities does a lot to try to negotiate between those things. It occurs to me that each of you has come from a different place in the humanities. You all have sort of a humanities background, but Linda, you come from American studies, African American studies. Jocelyn, you were a history teacher, and Pat, you were and are an attorney. I actually started thinking about this, Pat, because of you, because the work of law, right, is often to take a very individual experience, and then that is broadened out into laws that affect many, many more people beyond that. So I'm curious. I'm also thinking about your introductions and the broad community work that you all do. There's a lot of that, right? You've talked about your communities exist in institutions. Your communities exist in little places. They get bigger, they get smaller, they contract and expand, depending on exactly who's around you. So I'm curious if any of you could reflect on that question about the individual versus that broader context that the individual lives in.
Well, I'll mention when I first met Jocelyn, first set eyes on her, I was a high school senior and went to Douglas College visiting the campus to decide where I wanted to go. And there was this woman with this beautiful African print dress on and this huge Angela Davis type afro. And all of you can tell the time period, how old we were. And I looked at her and I said, she had, I see now that she's not as tall as she appeared to me that day. But I said, this is the kind of woman that I want to be. I want to, have command of my personal world and have command of the world at large. And that was one of it was seeing her and other students like her that that made me make the decision to go to the school that I went to, because I saw that there were a group of strong women there. And we were chatting early in the conversation about, what we've done through the years. And I think I said then that we were that generation of women who came up through the women's movement. And because of that, had a much different outlook on what our lives could possibly be than the generations before us. And I think that has carried us through all of our professional lives. We do realize you can't have every single thing that you want, but we did experience a world that was far different from the world of our mothers and our aunts and our uncles. And I think that shaped us as well. Our introduction to a different way of living, to a different kind of scholarship, to that encouraged boldness, and that encouraged a more participatory kind of way of conducting your life. I think we've brought that to the work that we do, that it's a much more, for us, the world was, we were taught to be much more inclusive than previous generations. So I'm not going to say that we're perfect and we don't have any prejudices and bigotry doesn't exist within our bones. It probably does, but it's something that we try to avoid rather than accentuate. I think I touched on your question.
Definitely.
Sure now, but anyway, so I see it.
I think that I can really say ditto to that. I would just add to that in my particular instance, that as Linda said earlier, there was always an expectation that you're going to do well, and also an expectation that you would do good, that you would help someone if you had the capacity to do so. From the time that I was in second grade, and I went to parochial schools throughout my growing up. I was always the person in the class who the teacher would say, you sit and you help this person. And so that in conjunction with seeing the things that people in my family did for others, not that we had a whole lot, but from time to time, you have the capacity and the obligation to help people who have less at that moment. And I think that's what Linda was getting at as well. And again, being in a community in college where I was in a decided, very small minority, you just know that you have to assist. And by the same token, you received assistance without ever asking for it.
Well, I have to concur 100% with my two friends. And I think about my grandparents and my mom. They left a legacy of community activism. So I feel like they had the bar very high. I don't know if I ever could reach the height of the things that they did. My grandparents were founding members of the local branch of the NAACP in Trenton. My grandfather was an Episcopal church. His church was St. Monica's on Spring Street in Trenton. So he took the forefront. And my grandmother, being an educator, even though once she was married, she had to leave the profession because sometimes they were really funny about that. But she was very active. She still was teaching on different levels. She would go to the migrant farms and work with the migrant workers to teach them. She prepared a lot of people to work at General Motors, a plant when they decided they would finally open it up to African Americans. The Hedgepath Williams case, which was the precedent for Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, actually, the litigation was prepared at my grandparents' dining room table. Wow. They sat down and discussed it. And this case took place around 1944, and Thurgood Marshall actually used it as part of his case to defend the integration of public schools. So I think it was just incumbent on me to be involved. I think about the African word Ubuntu. I am because we are. So as the community, we have to work together. We have to embrace each other. And who I am today is because all of the people that I have met on my life journey. So I'm very thankful and grateful for that. And I also want to take this time to thank Pat Atkins for inviting me to be part of the Great Migration Oral History Project in Trenton, even though sometimes I wonder if I should thank her.
That's the truth of the work we do. That's the truth. We did have a question from the audience that I wanted to bring to attention. Nicole, do you want to ask the question yourself? Do you want to unmute yourself? Or I can ask it for you if you prefer. So, oh, Nicole's mic is not working. I will ask the question for her. There we go. That makes sense. So Nicole was interested to hear if any of you, how the pandemic has changed or reinforced your values, or how has the pandemic changed or reinforced what you see to be the power of the humanities? So curious about the impact of the pandemic on how you do your work and think about your work.
Well, you go ahead, Linda.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Well, for me, and obviously I'm speaking for everybody, it's brought us the advantage of having interchanges like this. I always say it's an ill wind that blows no good. And obviously the pandemic has been a tragedy. On the other hand, it's brought lots of people, including persons who otherwise would not be electronically involved, children who would never have had the opportunity to do the things that they're doing now, virtually, and researching, learning on the internet. It's made things easier for me. On the other hand, I am more isolated, but I haven't noticed anything negative about it other than 20 extra pounds.
Glad I'm not the only one.
I've got 30 extra pounds, so I can beat you on that one. I was isolated pre the pandemic because I have a husband and a son who were both quite ill, and a son waiting for a heart transplant, and a husband with all kinds of issues. So I was really isolated not to the same extent, but pretty much so, 18 months before the pandemic. So it's really been a long haul for us. It didn't really stop my working though, because we've all discovered new ways of using technology, which is a good thing. It's bumped up my letter writing to an extent, which I also think is a good thing. I'm not so sure it's been a good thing for the world at large. I think sometimes the physical isolation has allowed us to look inward more than looking outward. And I think some of the ills that we're having in society now are partially a result of that, because we're not forced. We can to see and experience and feel as much of the outside world as we have done in the past. It would have been nice, I think, had we become more centered as individuals and more giving and more loving, but I really don't think that it's worked that way. I think that it's developed in some ways a selfishness that we're going to have to work to get rid of. So work-wise, it's been fine. I think that the projects that I have been working with pre-pandemic are the same ones that I'm involved with now, even a few new ones, and that's been okay. I think that the concern about how to reach audiences has been bumped up because of this, and that's a good thing. But overall, I think it's an experience that I could have done without.
Mm. Yes, the pandemic has created many, many challenges, also many advantages. I love going to church on Zoom because I could go to church in my pajamas, which maybe that's crazy. But I think about the digital divide though. So a lot of children in urban communities are not able to access their school, even though they did. Many districts did distribute Chromebooks or some type of laptop or something, but so many children have not been able to access their education. And even if they do access it, they're not connecting. So they miss that human interaction. I think about this saying about no man, and I want to say, or woman, is an island. And we really do need one another. And you, like Linda pointed out, you can see the difference where people just are very callous or cavalier. And we have to really work on that and change that, because we're not going to survive. It'll be the end of humanity. So we don't want that to happen.
I just want to remind everyone that if you do have a comment or a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we're happy to hear from others besides just me. I'm certainly not the only one. who is interested, I'm sure, in the work of, of these individuals. All of you have, grew up in the African American community, have spent a lot of time looking very closely at African American experience and African American history specifically. And I'm curious how, one of the most interesting things about doing something like having anything, being able to do anything for a long time, is how that experience changes throughout time, right? Your position within it changes. Your relationship to whatever the topic is or the community is changes. I'm curious how your relationship to African American history in New Jersey, the African American experience in New Jersey, personally and or professionally, has changed for you as your career has continued throughout time.
Well, people are not as surprised to see me show up when I'm invited somewhere. They never expected in my early days of seeing a Black woman come in to do a workshop or something like that. I don't get that great look of surprise as much anymore as I once did. So that's changed. I think the expectations aren't as rigid either about women or about people of color as they were when I first started out. And, when I go back my days in, well, I went to a women's college, as you know, but my days in graduate school, my first semester, I took 3 classes. One had 10 people. There was 1 woman, that was me. The other had 15 people, 1 woman, that was me. The other had, I think, about 12 people, and there were two women in it. The world has changed a good deal. And as a result, those jobs that I had after that were filled with men. That has changed a good deal, and white men, not men of color. Although some of the boards that I sit on, that hasn't changed at all. They're still filled with white men, older white men. I'm an older Black woman at this point, but I still find myself being alone. So in some ways it's changed, but for this kind of field, not that much, not anywhere near as much as I would have expected it to change. The past 2 years, ever since the George Floyd incident, I get more invitations to speak. I find that lots of people are finally waking up to see that Martin Luther King's marches didn't resolve everything, that there's still lots of problems out there. That has changed. The recognition that racism is an issue that is much deeper than we previously thought, that has changed. We'll see what happens when it comes to resolving it. But other than that, not as much change as I would have liked to have seen, not as much acceptance as I would have liked to have seen.
Not surprising, but rather disappointing.
Although, I read a colleague brought to my attention a newspaper article from 1852, which I'll share with you if you like privately, but I've been studying this stuff for a long time. It even had me gasping. I couldn't read it all at once. This was a person who was on the side of abolition, pro-abolition. And his ideas of the capability of people of color was just astoundingly bad to me. So when I look at something like that, yeah, I can say that there's progress, but overall it's still difficult.
Well, I'm thinking about CRT, critical race theory, which is like, whoo, very hot topic. And I think most people don't even understand what it's about. It's not something that's really taught in the public school. It was something that was primarily for law school, where they would examine different laws and dealing with racism, bigotry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think about the late John Lewis when he said, get into good trouble. So maybe that needs to be our mantra, get into good trouble. You know, I'm thinking about our nation has a sordid history, which they have tried to suppress, hide. I don't know what word or adjective I could use, but it's time to pull back the curtain, reveal it, let people know. Out of the first 16 US presidents, 12 of them were slaveholders. And yet the founding fathers, they wrote this document talking about liberty and justice, but who was the liberty and justice for? You know, the indigenous people weren't included. African Americans weren't included. Basically, women were excluded. So it's time to examine. And I think it's beginning. You could see a lot of things are changing. Princeton University removed Woodrow Wilson's name from the International School of Politics. And in Virginia, right, Pat? You said it was called Confederate Row or Monument Row, where a lot of the statues have been dismantled. So it's time to address so many of these issues. They resonate with me. Sometimes it's very painful also. And Linda, when you talked about that document from the 1800s, you know, things like that, it makes you very sad. But we have to talk about it because we never will heal if we don't talk about it. And I always maintain that a lot of times for African Americans, we actually never had the opportunity to heal from enslavement. We're still in pain, we're still suffering. A lot of times people won't even discuss a lot of things that happen. You think about Black Wall Street, you know, and that's not an isolated case. That's the sad thing. So we have to figure out how we can get together, because if we don't, it's not going to be pleasant.
I've seen a lot of change from the time when I was in law school, when there were many fewer women than men, and same thing for people of color. And we have gotten to a place, I have lived to see Barack Obama, and I have come to a place where now we have so many African American successful women, particularly right now in the legal profession. When I graduated from law school in 1979, I knew every single Black woman lawyer in New Jersey. We all knew each other. That's no longer the case, I'm happy to say, because there's so many of us. We've had a Black woman be president of the New Jersey Bar Association. I couldn't have imagined that in 1979. And one instance, in my view, of progress is the fact that although politicians are doing a lot of palavering about the probability of there being an African-American woman on the Supreme Court, young people, teenagers, and very, very young adults, they are not overwhelmed by this idea. They seem to almost take it for granted. And in a way, that's significant progress. It means that they have expectations that we could not have imagined. And other than that, I say ditto to what Linda and Jocelyn said.
It's been a mixed bag from the beginning. It's going to be a mixed bag for a while, I think. But Pat, you really, I think what you're saying is important, right? What all of you are saying is important, but this perspective of the way that the story is framed and whose story you choose to tell at any given moment is going to really shape the way that we understand the world that we're living in. And I think that's foundational to the humanities. And this is bringing me, we surprisingly are coming to the end of our hour. And I had one question that I perhaps selfishly, but really wanted to wrap up our conversation with the three of you. So we're in this moment, right, at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, where we've been doing our work for 50 years, right? When the excuse me, when the National Endowment for the Humanities was created, right, it was the idea that the humanities have value intrinsically by themselves. The humanities have value, are critically important to the creation of a strong democratic society. And then simultaneous to the foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, right, that big federal organization being created, the state humanities councils were created. And the idea behind it was, we want to take this big national idea and bring it down at each state level as well, to make sure that it's not just, the big organizations and the elite organizations that are going to be able to get all of that funding that becomes there and all of those resources, right? But that our job here at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities is making sure New Jersey has a big voice in all of the stories that we're telling, right? That's the work that all of you have been doing since our inception, basically. We take that charge very seriously, right? This grassroots, our job is to get this funding out here and these resources out here to the people of New Jersey who are doing humanities-based work throughout the state. So as the three of you who have been educating New Jerseyans about their own history and culture for literally decades, when you look forward to the next 50 years, right, the next 5 decades, what should we at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities be focused on advocating for here in the Garden State? What should our priorities be?
Well, I think I'll go back to the very first question and this talk about the interrelatedness of communities and how we're all in this one thing together, and we have to look for ways to make people understand and realize that. I mean, I think that the biggest coalition that should exist in this country is the coalition of poor working people and the poor, no matter their color. And they're probably the communities that are most distant from each other and who have the most animus towards one another. So I'm going back to this whole idea of interrelatedness and making us all realize that every human deserves the rights that this country says that we're supposed to deserve and more. And I don't have a magic wand that can tell you exactly how to do that, but I think that should be one of the goals. I think and that includes getting the big money, the corporate people to wake up as well and to understand and realize their responsibility to the rest of society.
Linda, can I just ask a follow-up question to that before Pat or Jocelyn jumps in as well? You mentioned, I think, when you were talking a couple minutes ago also about our founding documents, right? We have slaveholders who are nonetheless writing about equality and justice. What are your thoughts about those documents that are at our founding? There's one school of thought that says, essentially toss them out. We need to understand our history in a different way. And that by continuing to look at those documents, we're really not looking in the right place. Others would say, no, we need to come back to those founding documents, but they need to be reinterpreted for the time, both in which they were written, but also about their relevance for today. I'm curious what you think about that.
I wouldn't throw them out. I mean, I think that it's been a long time since I've studied them, but the words there are okay. It's the interpretation of those words through the centuries that has been the issue. So when they say we the people, they were not considering women. You know, they were not considering indigenous people. They were not considering people of African descent. If we really, you know, look at we the people and understand that people is everyone, you know, everyone, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in, but we're still having trouble understanding the word we. And I think it's just that simple. It's just wanting for your neighbor the same thing that you want for yourself. It's wanting for the family of the poor farmer, the corporate person, you know, saying that, you know, their children should have everything, access to everything as my children have. And I think we tend to think that if one group is going to get something, it means that another group is going to lose something. It doesn't have to mean that. It really doesn't have to mean that. So, and that's my, I think I answered your question. It's not throwing away the documents, it's reinterpreting, or it's interpreting what they were supposed to mean from the very beginning. You know, I know we can't help ourselves. We're selfish. That's human nature, but we have to move on from that and understand we're never going to be what we should be until we do that.
How did Jocelyn?
I'm
You
just
know,
thinking about, go ahead, Pat.
I was gonna say, if Jocelyn doesn't mind, Sam, are you still on?
His name is up there. Come out of hiding, Sam.
Sam?
Yes, yes.
Yes, all three of us have worked with Sam Stevens, who has a background in sociology and who writes practically every proposal in the past few years that the Trent House has gotten, and he's responsible for our being here today. And he and I have had these discussions, and I'm sure he's had them also with Linda. I would ask Sam, as the person who spent so much time writing proposals and talking about what we need and how we can use grants in the most efficient and effective way, if he could speak to this.
Wow. Well, I'm going to be really, really quick because I want Jocelyn and Pat to respond to the broader question. But, you know, in terms of what I think the Council for Humanities and Humanities in general can do is foster collaboration and encourage collaboration among organizations that may look like they don't have a lot in common, but at a core, they're either their mission or even a specific project they're doing has some connection. And I think that builds that kind of sense of community and sense of common purpose. And that's certainly something that the council has done for the Trent House, with the Trent House. And I know that everyone, the other panelists, have all participated in those kind of collaborations. So thanks, Pat.
Thank you so much, Sam.
I would just simply say I agree with that 100%. And what Sam really has said is what Linda has said, just in different words. I look forward to working with the council in the future if we can. And I'm sure that Jocelyn, despite all this work I got her involved in, I think she feels the same way, but speak for yourself.
I will. I'm just thinking about one of the questions that Gigi had sent us about, do we think of humanities as being for the elite or elitists? And I just checked the definition, and it indicates that the humanities is an appreciation of human values and culture. It is how we express our culture and creativity. So I think the humanities is not really elitist. Maybe some people have elevated to that level, but also I'd like to say that I feel it's imperative that we change the narrative from history, meaning his story, to our story, to include the marginalized voices. So just advocating for people that seem to be voiceless, that have been overlooked. Their story has not been told. And Pat always mentions the African adage about who tells the story. And until the lion tells the story, you're not going to know what's going on. The hunter is always telling the story, but when are we going to allow the lion to tell the story? So the humanities, the Council for the Humanities, hopefully they will encourage the lion's story to be told.
If I can just bring up one illustration, there's a painter, Jacob Lawrence, who does have a New Jersey connection. In his migration series, one of his paintings is of three girls standing, their backs are to us, they are facing the blackboard, and they're of varying heights. And they're children of the migration. And you see the one sort of writing on the board, struggling. And you see the next one sort of reaching, up a little higher, and then the third one. And I think that's just a perfect metaphor for life. We all want what's best for our children. We're all stretching and reaching for a better understanding, a better way of knowing, a better way of living. And I think that's our job as humanists, really, to make sure that everyone has that kind of opportunity. If they are willing to stretch and grow and learn and grasp and then share it, will be a much better place.
I concur. I just want to add that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. So as you say, stretching out and reaching for higher heights, the ancestors say that we are their fondest dream,
I like to believe that.
We are. And it'll go on to the next generation and the next generation and generations to come. So I'm just so ecstatic to be part of this first cohort. So I want to thank the New Jersey Council of the Humanities for including us in this project, because it's really been a wonderful journey and we're excited to continue.
Well, we're grateful to have all of you as part of community history and as part of lots of other work that's happened in the last few years at the council, and I'm sure will continue to happen in the coming years. Pat, Jocelyn, Linda, thank you so much for your conversation today. I've been sitting here taking notes along the way. I'm just gonna do whatever you tell me to do, because I think that's a good way to approach this work. Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank everyone here today for joining us. We really appreciate it. I mentioned, we talked a little bit about New Jersey Council for the Humanities' new community history program. And Pat and Jocelyn, working with the Trent House, were part of our first cohort. So happy to see other cohort members in attendance today too. It's great to see all of you. So I wanted to mention also that we're currently accepting applications for our next cohort. And the applications are due on February 23rd. You can go to njhumanities.org. And under programs, you'll find community history. You can learn more about the program. I'm happy to answer questions about it at any time as well. So check it out if you're interested in exploring your own community's history in a cohort environment, getting some additional training about how that work happens. Check out community history. We also have a grant cycle opening up on March 1st. So again, njhumanities.org/grants can take you to information about our incubation and action grants. The application process opens with the LOI on March 1st, and applications are due April 21st. I hope you can join us for our next 50th anniversary event. We're having these events monthly. Our March program is entitled Working in Government, Views from New Jersey Women. And that will take place via Zoom on March 15th at noon. Registration link is available on our website. And there's information about all of our 50th anniversary programming there. In fact, I'm going to put the link in the chat so you can read about it. We're grateful for all of you who are now officially part of our 50th anniversary celebration. Again, thank you so much, Linda, Pat, and Jocelyn, and everyone who made comments and asked questions today. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.